to the cloud. Hello, welcome to the Helm Weekly Developer Call, July 15th, 2021. We'll start off with some announcements and I will turn to Matt Farina.
All right. So yesterday we had our normal Patch Wednesday, which is the second Wednesday of every month, where we will typically release a patch unless we have a minor release or a major release or something else on that day or quite around it. And so yesterday we had version 3.6.3 released, which is our normal patch release. And the next release cycle is set for August 11th. That's a Wednesday. And that's when we will have 3.6.4 scheduled for release. Also, just so folks know, at the end of August, August 30th is when we're slated to have, it's a Monday, our 3.7.0 minor release candidate, because we'll release the minor release something about 10 days later, a couple Wednesdays in. And so that's the Monday before, to give us enough time to cut the release candidate, make sure everything's good, and just get it tested. So that's what's coming with releases and the release we just had.
Wonderful. Thank you, Farina. Okay, on to discussion items. I've been kind of poking this repo cleanup project overall, and I have a question about the monocular repo. It looks like, Farina, you made progress on that. You marked it with an obsolete triangle of warning. Are we to the point now where you can click the clicky and actually mark it as an archived repo, or are there more steps for monocular?
I think we can click the clicky.
Excellent. Let it be noted that Farina will click the clicky.
Yeah, I'll probably do it in the background in one of the other discussions here, just to make sure it gets done today.
Fantastic.
If I have
one other, yeah. Absolutely. Then I have one other one that I was looking at. It looks like the query store quay logs or key logs, or however you pronounce that correctly, is a repo that was instantiated a while ago and never had anything at all done on it. And I'm kind of wondering, is that a repo we want to continue to have be a live repo? Do we want to hit archive on it?
I need to go check to see if it's still actually in use. So we wrote that, and it was actually in use to keep long-term metrics on our image polls out of key. And I don't know that we ever actually did anything. So for the public, QAY.io, for any of the metrics they have up on there, they're only kept for 2 months back. So if you want to look for longer term trends or any of those things, it's not possible, because that's just too much data. I talked to them back in the day on this. They just don't keep the data forever. So they only give you 2 months back. So we were taking that data using their API for our images in there, and dumping them to object storage so we could have longer term trends. I don't know if that stuff's actually running anymore. I haven't looked at it in a long time. I don't think we've ever pulled the data out of there and ever looked at it. But that operated that, and it's been running as cron jobs in the background, I think. But I haven't looked to see where that sits. So we shouldn't archive it yet, but that's one of those things we should investigate, because if we've never used the data and we've been storing it, then we probably don't care. And we
all right. Well, yeah. No. All right. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for lending clarity to that. And then Farina, you may as well stay unmuted, because we have our next topic, three-way merge patch and CRs.
Yeah. So Fisher commented on this. Adam, you may have something. So there was an issue that was brought up on custom resources. Don't use a three-way merge, but our documentation says we do a three-way merge on all the stuff. And it turns out that custom resources aren't a three-way merge in practice. And this may be something that was added to the API and everything later. But the issue is this a bug fix? Because our documentation says specifically in the, quoted in the issue, in Helm 3, we now use a three-way strategic merge patch. Helm considers the old manifest, its live state, and the new manifest when generating a patch. Now, it turns out that that's totally true for the built-in ones, but it's not for custom resources. And so our documentation says one thing, our implementation says something else, but I don't know that custom resources were able to do a three-way merge all the way back in the day when we did this. So is this a bug fix that can go in 3.6.4, or is this a feature that's got to wait till 3.7? That's what I don't know. We have a pull request up on it. And so that's why I wanted to talk. And Adam, I am looking directly at you right now because I think you worked on this code. So you may vaguely have an idea of what the heck's going on here.
So this is a tough one because you're correct in the fact that this is the way Cube Control did it when we wrote the three-way merge. So the documentation was not specific enough in stating that the three-way merge patch is only applied to built-in resources because Kubernetes libraries at the time did not support three-way merges for custom resources. So I think we need to update. This is a tough one because we'd like to support that, but it is a breaking change in the fact that updates will work differently. So if somebody's been running updates with custom resources, all of a sudden it's going to behave differently when you do an update now, if this is merged.
Is it worth exploring a HIP to explore the behavior and kind of determine how we want it to be, or is it just a question of when you want to put it in?
Well, ideally, we would like it now that Kubernetes supports it. It's just a matter of versioning.
Right. Is it major? Is it a minor or a patch? Is the question, right?
Or is it a major?
Yeah, I'm thinking, is it a minor or major? Because updates will work completely differently. So with custom resources then. So you won't get the same behavior.
Well, if we follow our backwards compatibility rules, then even though you could classify it as a bug-ish, you couldn't break it until major.
Well, technically it is not a bug. It's just the documentation isn't specific enough.
Yeah, it's a documentation bug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you fix the documentation, it'll be a patch then?
Well, it's an inconsistency bug and it's a documentation bug. We cannot fix the inconsistency because we break our backwards compatibility.
Unless we could change it via a flag to custom resources. So
You could do that. Yeah. Yeah. The only thing is, yeah.
Yeah, because the issue is the documentation is just too general. Like you could argue the same thing with like CRDs. It doesn't specify that CRDs don't use the three-way merge, but it doesn't, because Kubernetes doesn't support that.
So it sounds like in the short term, we can make the documentation more specific. Perhaps the action item is open an issue in the docs repo saying what should happen, and then someone can follow up on writing the doc. And that's what we can do now. And then make an issue with a Helm v4 tag saying what we could fix in the future.
Yeah, it goes on the Helm v4 queue, basically.
yeah. So what I hear is this is something we want. We don't want to wait till Helm 4. It is a feature change, so it has to go into a major or feature release. So 3.7 at the earliest. And if it's going to go into 3.7 because it's a behavior change, and I'm trying to get the HIP here on this stuff, because it's a behavior change in general, it would have to sit behind a flag.
That's correct.
To opt in.
Okay, awesome. Does that give us what we need to go back to that issue and follow up?
I'm doing it right now as we go, and that's why I'm confirming, so I can just hit submit.
Do you guys
Perfect.
remove a flag on a major drop then, or the flag lives forever?
On a major, oh, go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, when we do a major release, it's Wild West. Anything can really
So you
change.
can just drop the flag if you want to at that point.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, you probably drop it because you'll
And
want
that's
the
what we would
consist.
do, yeah.
You'd want the
Exactly.
consistency.
I agree.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, since Farina is typing and typing and typing, I'm going to jump to Mark for the very next one. So Farina can wrap up what he's working on. Mark, building in
Okay.
Kubernetes without Docker.
So I'm cheating a little bit. It's not a Helm related question. It's more tapping into the community for input if
Mhm.
anybody else has done that. So you guys probably know that Kubernetes is dropping support for Docker server, let's say.
Shim, yeah.
Yeah, the shim. And so we're working at getting rid of that. That's fine. But we build our container images in Docker right now through in Kubernetes through Docker. So we want to switch to something else. And the things we are trying don't always work with every Docker file we have, or they're slower, or they don't use the cache as well. And we are surprised to see that we haven't found a as good solution as Docker itself. So I was wondering, has anybody dealt with this in the community where you build your container images in a Kubernetes cluster? What do you use?
I'm using more of a tool called or a project called Shipwright and using OCI as the container in Builda.
You're using Builda?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one of the experiments we've done. Some build failures happen. We have a lot of different projects. So Build does one, okay. Anybody else?
Mark, I'd use Canico and it works, but I think I also had cache issues.
Yeah, Canico, we found some cache issues. It's also very, limited in what it does. It's very good at what it does. And okay, that's one of the two that we're investigating. If nobody else has, I won't take more time.
You are right in saying this is slightly off topic, though, of course, build pipelines are highly relevant to Helm. But it looks like we got at least a little bit of data for you to get going on there. And I want to
Thank
hit
you.
these last couple of issues on the agenda before we go back to freeform.
Go ahead.
Anything goes
Thank you.
discussion. Thanks. Farina, you have a docs bug or Helm bug with no repo dependencies.
So the one that I got, actually, because of follow-up, we can just cut it because it is a bug. That was actually pretty easy. Oh, wait. Hold on, let me double
This
check.
was your next issue, the
Yeah, hold on.
9928. This is
Hold
the
on.
package subcharts and external repository issue.
Yeah, sorry. I'm
This is whether it's a doc issue or it's the way it should be working, basically.
You wanted to discuss whether it's a bug or a doc issue or a feature request.
yes, I'm trying to remember the context of this one here because I put it in several days ago.
I am going to drop a link right in the meeting chat here to the most relevant comment written by you, which might
The title was cannot use packaged subcharts without external repository.
So it's if you either have your subchart directory expanded or the tarball.
No. Now I see what it is. So, okay, it's a little confusing. So if you have a subchart that does not sit in an external repository, it only sits in the charts directory, right? In your dependencies, you don't specify a repo field. Okay. It can only be a directory, not a chart archive. Right. So if I had chart, my dependencies, I had foo, and I marked it at something like caret 1.0.0, right? Foo has to be a directory in the charts repository. If there's no repository specified, it can't be an archive of foo-1.2.3.tgz. That doesn't work. Yet the docs say it could be an archive or a directory. So the question is, now, by the way, it's not a trivial change to fix this, right? Because if somebody has a version range, right? Or I guess with a chart.lock file, you'd pin it to something, maybe, I'm not exactly sure. And then you'd be able to work out the archive name structure from that. With the directory, it's easy. With an archive and some for ranges, it gets more difficult to figure out what the right thing would be. So is this a docs bug that says you can use archives in there without specifying the repository? Or is this an implementation bug that doesn't handle the archives properly?
I believe this would work if it's not listed as a dependency, because dependencies in the YAML file, it doesn't.
No, not anymore. It might have been Helm 2 and Helm, I don't remember. In Helm 3, it doesn't. In fact, Dr. Butcher, if he were here, would be able to argue that, because having some in there that weren't listed as dependencies was an arguing point he was talking about. We don't want to do that anymore. And so if it's not listed here and you run something like a Helm dep update, those old files are wiped away if it's not listed as a dependency. And Dr. Butcher was arguing that that was intentional, but I don't remember his argument in order to regurgitate it here. So I don't know if this is a docs bug or an implementation bug. I'm tempted to say it's a docs bug and a feature request if somebody wants it. Does anybody see a counter argument to that?
It's the same idea with the versioning then, right? Or you know, there's no flag needed in this case. You just, it's a feature, and then the bug says only directories.
Yes, only chart
Only
directory.
directories, change the wording, and then a feature to support archive. Then.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I can go take care of this afterwards if everybody's good with that. But that's what I would probably do it as. So that way the docs match the current behavior. And then we mark it as a feature.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Would it be worth testing? How did it work on the initial release of 3.x?
Oh, I went
So-
back and I looked. So I
Yeah.
went and I read the source, went all the way back to the initial work on 3.x, and it's always just been a directory.
All right. So
It's not a regression. All right. It would have been easy to mark as a bug, as a regression. Yeah.
Okay. Great. I think we have our consensus there. And once again, Farina, you have one more object, or sorry,
saw
one
the-
more item.
So
Version
I saw
field
this
and file.
void in things for the meeting. And so as I was triaging this
appreciate
week,
it.
I found lots of fun discussion points, at least.
What do we
If
think of this
people want to
one?
fill this up, I will throw less things in here, by the way, if you've got other discussion points.
Mhm.
So we, in our documentation, we don't list the version field as being optional. But on file dependencies that use the file schema, file : / it has in practice been optional until a fix went in the other day. And that fix actually forced it to be required because it was looking to do semver erroring out. And there's already been an issue filed and a pull request to fix it. But I figure if this is actually a regression, which is what I was going to do, then is it something that needs to be updated in the docs to say it's optional for files? And so I thought I would open that up here. Now, yeah. So I wanted to open that up here because with a file on the file system that you're pointing to, right, then you can't exactly have a version, but there is still an opportunity for things like version mismatches, right? Maybe you're pointing to a file and you specify a version and then it doesn't meet that version. Then what, right? Because something else happened in your workflows. Should Helm catch this? Should it not? Is this a regression? And it's just for that file case. It's not for any other case. Because some of what we talk about here will depend on the feedback for the pull request to fix it. Like if it's an optional thing, then we should try to respect it. If it's specified, yeah. So any thoughts on this?
Is there an issue for that?
There's an issue
didn't
linked
quite
in
follow.
the notes. Let me pull it up. I'll share it in here. There's the issue. It's 9944. And we know exactly the change that caused it. And as soon as I saw it, I knew the pull request merge that caused this problem, because it just showed up in the patch release that went out on release Wednesday. But it's where documentation doesn't match. So I'm tempted to say we update the docs to say it's optional for files when the file schema is used. And yeah, it's optional for the file scheme, and then try to respect it in the file scheme. And there's a linked pull PR that says fix issue 9944. And then so it would be considered a regression in that case, but it doesn't match current docs today.
I mean, updating the docs to match reality sounds like the lowest hanging possible fruit. Like that seems very reasonable, unless we think that the reality that exists on the ground now is going to violate the principle of least surprise and like break things in people's pipelines. It sounds like you don't expect that, but what are you thinking?
Well, I mean, the reality in 363 is different than the reality in 362. So was 363 a regression or just an enforcement of our rules
Exactly.
that we didn't enforce before?
Exactly. So that's what I see is, because the documentation was intended to not be optional, but it was optional. That's what I gather, right? And then all of a sudden now this fix match what the document says.
Mhm.
But then people see different behaviors. This is an interesting set of events. It's not easy. All right, so what you're suggesting is you change it back, you change the documentation to match the previous behavior, and then this is a regression. That's what you're saying. I think
Yeah,
that
do we go back to the previous
Right.
behavior and mark it as a regression and update the docs? Or do we
That is
just say that this is implementing the requirement that should have been there before and it was a bug that it wasn't?
Yeah, this one I think is different because this was explicit in the documentation. It wasn't like something that was non-specific in the documentation. So I would almost say this one is a bug.
But let's think about what we want. Do we want the behavior documented, or do we want the behavior, the optional behavior? No, what do you really want? And if that dictates what you want to do, right? So
Does anybody remember the reason why it was made mandatory or expected to be?
Why it was
Why was it optional?
Well, the
For
documentation
file.
says the
says
documentation says required, so the
Required,
intention
right.
I assume was required. But is there
Yeah.
a reason for that?
well, sure. If you don't have a version, right? You haven't specified a version, then what version are you supposed to pick up?
right.
Yeah, because
Right.
we never had
Latest, I guess.
latest. Yeah, but there was never that was never in there to pick up the latest. We were being
And
more
and if you
explicit.
don't pass it, what do you do? If you don't, if it's optional, what's the behavior? If you don't pass the version, then what do you do today?
Yeah, no, the person has a good point. If you're pointing to a specific thing on the file system, then that's the specific thing. But at the end of the day, you know, the version is, as Adam said, we always explicitly said we need the version. So yes, it sounds like you're twice specifying something, but that's just the way it
Yeah.
is.
And what if the version doesn't match the version in the archive you're pointing to? Shouldn't your system catch, hey, you specified this file, but the version in that file isn't the same as the version you specified? There's a problem here.
Yep.
Shouldn't your tooling catch that?
That's an integrity check. If you
Yeah.
ask me, it's like checking digest,
Okay. Then how about we treat it as that it's non-required, or I'm sorry, that it is non-optional, it is required. and that it was a bug that we didn't do that integrity check before, and make
Mhm.
sure we do that right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Does that sound good? In
Yeah.
this case, the docs are right because there was intent behind it.
Right.
Okay.
No one
Yeah,
knows,
'cause-
but we're going to go with it. How about that?
And
One
that's
more-
why I brought it here to the court of deciding things.
But that's
One more
why
argument.
nobody knows, but we're going to go with it.
Was that Adam?
One more argument for declaring this a bug is, like if a version is specified and the file path that you're pointing to is incorrect version, if we don't do the check, then it's still going to accept it, even though you explicitly said, I want this version.
Mhm.
And right
Okay.
now it would just be like, okay, fine, it's the wrong version. I don't care.
Okay.
All right.
So I have to drop now.
Yes.
So I can go fill these in, but it might be an hour or so before I go update all of these things. Probably be a couple hours
Right.
before I can get to it. But I have all my tabs open, everything ready to go. All right.
And do I have any notes or triage for the next week? I will be gone next week. I cannot do anything. Farina will be gone. Adam will be gone. We'll have to find someone. We'll perhaps have to leave it indeterminate because we are at time. Thank you all so much. And I will not be here next week, so I will see you in 2 weeks, but we will definitely have a call next week with Martin as moderator. All right. Thanks. Take care.
Thank you.